Hello, still standing listeners. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Shannon Torrance. I'm your host, and I'm here today with Libba Phillips, who has a beautiful and interesting story that I hope will inspire and be also informative and helpful to people. I'm going to just start by reading Libba's bio, and then I will have Libba tell her story. So, this is Libba Phillips, and she is an intuitive life coach. She helps people connect to divine guidance so they can triumph over even the most difficult setbacks and manifest what is in their highest good. You're in the right place, Libba. Libba's story is about her own dark night of the soul and how she was divinely guided to turn a tragic situation when her younger sister Ashley disappeared over 20 years ago into a movement to shine the light on a silent population of vulnerable missing teens and adults and her own connection to her intuitive abilities that were awakened during this time. This is a story of how she went from being a complete skeptic in all things related to God, angels, and the divine to knowing for sure that life is not just happening to us, but happening through us. Welcome, Libba. Thank you so much for lending your time and energy today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It is truly, truly an honor.
Same here. Uh, yeah, you know your story and where the best place to begin would be. So I'm just going to kind of have you share your story from wherever you feel comfortable.
Okay. I guess I could I think I would paint the background. So,
Yes.
we're in 2023. I would say this happened about 25 years ago, late 90s. And at that time I was, pharmaceutical sales rep. I would wear a business suit every day, operating from the left brain. And I was also living in Sacramento, California at the time. Now I'm in Tampa, Florida. And I received a phone call one afternoon when I got home from work. I actually almost didn't answer the phone, and the voice on the other end was one of my other younger sisters telling me that my sister Ashley was missing. And everything in that moment, that scene in The Matrix where things start to move kind of slow motion. This is what began to happen to me. The room started to spin, and everything became a blur after that. What I can tell you is that I got on the next plane home, which was back to Tampa, Florida, determined to try to help my family find my sister myself. Probably the greatest shock after absorbing and accepting, okay, this is happening, was my sister had been mentally ill for a while. She had also been struggling with a co-occurring addiction. And when she went missing, she was actually in a rehab facility here in Tampa. And the insurance, unbeknownst to my parents, actually dropped her. And so they released her without informing anyone. And my sister was very vulnerable and without medication or anything like that. She was actually on the streets for a number of days before anyone really knew she was missing. By the time my parents realized she was missing, they went immediately to law enforcement, and law enforcement said, not my problem, not our problem. And even though, they tried to explain she was vulnerable, she was endangered, she wasn't in her right mind, um, their words were, if she gets caught using drugs, then it's our problem. That was alarming to me as a woman. Sure that many other women can relate to the idea of being vulnerable, being on the streets, being in an unknown situation, and not being in one's right mind. So that, learning of that was so appalling to me.
Mhm.
The just the injustice of it. I thought, wait a minute. My day job was communicating to doctors, in my work as a pharmaceutical rep, logic. Of course they will buy from me because I have something that, they are interested in that will help them. So in my logic mind, I'm thinking, oh, here's all the reasons why they need to be looking for her and open an investigation. They did none of those things. And so, the normal way of communicating and solving a problem was not working. Um, so we decided to do really what any other family would do, is we had to look for her ourselves. And I don't know if you've ever like had a missing pet, for example, and just the franticness of that, of putting a flyer together, like today we can put things online, we can put them on Nextdoor, we can put them on Facebook. Remember, this is the late 90s. So this stuff was not as popular as it is today. And so it was much like, putting together a flyer for a missing dog
Mhm.
and going out onto the streets, knocking on doors, putting them up on telephone poles. It was not like a cadre of volunteers getting together for, a vigil by candlelight. It seemed like pretty much right away the disparity that I would become so familiar with, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, of, someone that you think of that's missing, like someone you hear about in the news, or you're standing in the grocery store and you're looking at the People magazine next to you, as you're about to check out, you see, the pregnant mom, or somebody that's celebrity, somebody that's, newsworthy on the cover that's gone missing. That was not the case for Ashley. And, we just, it was like looking for a needle in a stack of needles,
Mm.
and we would start to canvass homeless shelters. We would then start to run into privacy laws. We were told time after time, we can't tell you if she's here. We would call hospitals, we would call jails, and we would begin to go to the morgue. That actually became a daily phone call for me, was to find out, if there were any unidentified people in the morgue. And, it was those first couple of weeks of, doing the groundwork of this. Basically all I had was like, I had like a notebook,
Mhm.
I'm just trying to write down everything. I'm thinking, okay, logically, um, we're not getting any law enforcement help. Like, how does this work? Like, how do people do this? So I started trying to reach out to different agencies. I'm like, okay, I'll just see who's out there doing this. And there were a few people out there. There was actually used to be a National Center for Missing Adults. They were based in Arizona at the time. And I remember the founder telling me, well, we would be happy to help you, but your sister's not listed as a missing person, so we can't take your case. And I'm like, okay, well, therein lies a problem, Okay, what else do we do? And it was really, there was so much panic and worry over, has she been abducted? Did she get in a car with a stranger? Is she, sleeping in a dumpster? Where is she? And I thought immediately, we need to get on the news.
Yeah.
That made sense to me. We need to get on the news. And so I started to make those phone calls. And again, it was, well, but your sister's not listed as missing. They wanted a police report. They wanted an official flyer. They wanted all their things for their, their marketing people, to look at the press release and that kind of stuff. We didn't have anything like that. And it was just one door being slammed in front of us, at every turn. Eventually, I had to return to my home in California. If I had a job, I had to make the rent and find a way to move forward. And not by any means, I wasn't giving up the search, but it was just okay. Life goes on, and that seemed really cruel to me. That okay, how's this? What are we going to do here? And we just said, okay, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing. And I had gotten back to Sacramento. I had only been there for a little while when I got another devastating phone call. And this time it was my mom telling me, I need you to get on a plane, come back home. Your granddad is dying. Like, he literally has days to live. And I'm thinking, really? Like, and at the time, my relationship with God, was non-existent. I'm like, hey, if you're there, like, this sucks. What is this? So I got back on a plane. I went back to the East Coast. At the time, he was living in Charleston, South Carolina. I was brokenhearted. I was angry. And I should preface this by saying that my grandfather was an Episcopal minister. And, I really always admired his faith in something more because he really lived it. He was the kind of person that, he would minister to somebody at the checkout line or in the parking lot. He just didn't know a stranger. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just borrow on his believing, but I just really didn't believe. And when I saw him on his deathbed, he was actually dying of colon cancer. He had been once a very gregarious, larger than life character, and he was frail and he was thin. And he called me over to the bedside and he said, I want you to pray with me, and I just kind of taken aback, thinking, okay, and
Yeah.
I'm thinking, okay, I'm just going to give in to, this his last request. It's not the time for me to act like I'm insulted by this, because in my heart, I'm like, well, I don't know who you're praying to, but he's not going to hear our
Yeah.
prayers. You spend a lifetime making him look good, and where has it gotten us? So he looked at me and he said, Libba, I want to tell you that God answers prayers, and I know your sister is missing. I know this is a really bad time. I know that you're close to losing your job, that there's a lot of things happening that don't make sense. And I said, yeah, and you're leaving. This isn't really good timing. And he said, well, everybody on the planet has a purpose. He said, when I get there, I'm going to see about yours.
Oh,
And those were his final words to me. He died the next day. Um, I had to go back to California if I wanted to keep my job. Sales manager was, keeping me focused on my quota and things like that, things of that nature. And I really was just lost. I thought, okay, what now? That's when things really got kind of weird. Um, again, like I said, it's a very logic minded person, list making. I still do that. But, I started to have just kind of this sense of knowing. I started to have really weird dreams where I would see glimpses of my future and I would be like, what? Like I would be shown, and this was sometime very far in the future, that I would be teaching people about people on the streets. And then someday I would be like doing spiritual work. And I'm like, this is very confusing and strange to me. I would have a very strong intuitive nudges. For example, had an intuitive nudge to go somewhere, and when I got to this particular location, there was a flyer about how to start a nonprofit that was being featured at the library, and I'm like, I know I need to go to that. Has that ever happened to you? Like you're somewhere and then you meet somebody or you see something, you're like, okay, this is strange, and it began to feel like, the best way I could put it is, it seemed like there were breadcrumbs that were being put out in front of me. And I didn't really have anybody that I could talk to about it. It was strange where, I'd be thinking of something and then, like there would be a coincidence where I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. And I just could not shake this knowing that all the information I was gathering in my notebook about people that I was meeting, other family members on the streets of other missing women and other missing girls, and I started to learn about, right now trafficking is kind of a buzzword, right?
hmm,
It's a very real thing. Back then, I mean, 20 plus years ago, what I was seeing, were sometimes you'd see women on the streets when my stepdad and I would go out at night. We'd go out very, very late at night, taking rolls of dollar bills, cartons of cigarettes, just to try to get people to talk to us.
yeah.
And we were learning. I remember vividly being in a car with him, sitting in a park, at like 2 in the morning, um, and a guy like pounds on the car hood, and I'm just like, oh my god, this is terrifying. And my stepdad, rolls the window down. And I think the guy's probably thinking we're there to do a drug deal or something. And we have flyers. And he says, "Hey, what are you doing here in the park?" And I said, "Well, we're trying to find my sister, and I know this is a known drug area." And my stepdad's like giving him money and cigarettes, and it's just the currency on the streets is
Yeah.
you know. And he looked at the flyer, and he looked at us, and you could see, he was. I don't want to be judgmental, but he was a guy that he was kind of a thug. He just
Yeah.
he was there to do whatever he was there to do. And he said, he goes, "Well, I know this for sure." He goes, "If your sister looked like that and she's been out here, she don't look like that no more."
Oh, yeah.
And girls that are lost on the streets, or they're running from something, or they're running to something, the guys just take them and they put them, in a drug house, and that's that. And these were the things that I was learning, and I'm keeping my notes. I began to compile that information, and I thought, okay, I'm going to keep track of this. I started to record some of the things we were doing, and on film, I started to write them down. And I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm supposed to do something. I feel like if I can just compile the data and put it in a website, that was my first thought. And I could at the time, turn it into a nonprofit. Maybe someday I will be in front of someone that I can educate them about what I'm learning. And, other things began happening where I once could get no media attention. Again, this was not a case that was deemed worthy of any kind of investigation. Media were not interested, and I began to hear, I call them now divine downloads. I began
Yeah.
to hear, write down what you want. Now, this was, 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002. Write down what you want. So the movie, the book, The Secret wasn't out or anything like that, but I was
Right.
reading anything positive I could get my hands on, like Wayne Dyer and Jack Canfield, authors like that. And it was, Power of the Subconscious Mind, Joseph Murphy. And I began to visualize. I'm like, okay, I just need to get in front of Jennifer Smith. And at the time, Jennifer Smith was the number one news anchor for Channel News 10 in Sacramento, California. And up until that point, I had had no success getting in front of her. Okay. But I just knew in my heart that if I could somehow get in front of her, this might be the break that I needed to get my sister's case out there and to start talking about what had become an organization at the time called Outpost for Hope. And that was the nonprofit work. And other families were starting to find me who were looking for help. So I knew I'm onto something, like there's something here that is important, that people are getting other information, some kind of information gathering. That's how it started. So, life was going forward. I had a doctor's appointment of all things. And I'm like, oh, I'm gonna blow it off. I really, really don't want to go. But I just kept feeling like, no, you need to go. It's that same feeling of, looking at the thing
Mm-hmm.
to go, go to the library, take this class. So I go to the doctor, and she says to me, "Hey, it'll make it a lot faster. I know you don't really want to be here." It's the lady doctor. "Don't really want to be here. If you just kind of tell me everything that's been going on in your life." And I'm thinking, you don't want to hear this. This is
Mm-hmm.
like probably the most depressing thing you'll hear all day. And I said, "Well, okay." And I said, "Well, my sister's missing, and she's mentally ill, and she's homeless, and she's last known location was somewhere on the streets in Tampa, Florida. Police won't file a report. I can't get on the news. I've started a nonprofit. I've got other family members from around the country who have lost loved ones. Somebody's got a brother with schizophrenia that was last seen in Las Vegas. Another person had a sister lost in Seattle. And it just seems really unjust, because when I'm out on the streets looking for her, I'm seeing things that aren't right. And I mean, I didn't tell her the other things, like, and I'm seeing things in dreams, I just kind of left that part to myself. And she said, "Well, that sounds really important. Like, I mean, if you could, who would you talk to?" And I said, "Well, I would Jennifer Smith. I mean, if you're going to ask, get the big ask. And this is a part where this was one of the very first things that happened to me that let me know for sure there was something more happening. She had her glasses on. She kind of pulled them down the bridge of her nose, and she said, "This is going to sound kind of weird." I'm like, "Okay, try me." She said, "Well, Jennifer Smith is my best friend.
Oh my goodness.
We actually go to church together, and I can't promise you anything, okay? But I'm going to call her as soon as we're done. And can I tell her your story?" I'm like, "Yes," and I'm trying not to cry. I don't want to get my hopes up. So we get finished. I leave. I get back outside. I'm getting into my car, and I'm pulling out of the parking lot, and I'm just feeling this sense of. It sounds like counterintuitive, but it's like uh, cautiously optimistic. Like,
Mhm.
okay, this could be something, right? I pull out of the parking lot to get onto the frontage road to get onto the freeway, and I see this giant city bus pass the car. And on the face of the city bus is a giant rat, and it's the face of Jennifer Smith. And she's in
That's
her trademark red suit, and the logo says, News 10. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, are you messing with me? Because this feels important, Like I said, there were breadcrumbs, and I
yeah.
didn't know then how significant things like coincidence and signs. I didn't know that. This was the language of the universe.
Mhm.
And I get home, my heart is pounding. I'm crying. There's a lot of emotions. I'm like, okay, just calm down. Like, if it's meant to happen, I'm like, wait a minute, why am I talking like this? If it's meant to happen, it'll happen. This is sort of new way of thinking for me. She calls me. She says, "I'd like to interview you. Can you be available tomorrow at 5 o'clock? I'll put you on my weekend special." She comes to my house the next day. She's in her trademark red suit. She's got her cameraman behind her.
Wow.
They walk in, and I'm on the news that weekend.
Amazing.
That's just one of the example, of
Synchronicity.
synchronicity. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. And, you know, if I had been told then, you know, now by the time I got on the news with Jennifer Smith, it'd been a little bit of a time. Okay. It wasn't like it happened right away or overnight. But by that time that started, just having that little bit of hope. But if someone had told me then, hey, it's going to take you 25 years of going through this, and I didn't have a definition then of what this means, before you have some kind of outcome, I probably would have run screaming down the street,
Yeah.
because what I would go on to learn was so difficult. And yet I would get situations like that would happen, and I would say, okay, I'm being guided. I mean, my granddad is making good on his promise. I began hearing him
Mhm.
in my
Wow.
mind. And, I began to realize that angels were not just cute little porcelain figurines on my mom's bookshelf.
Gosh, yeah.
They were, um, I didn't see them like I'm seeing you, but, I had a sense of their presence. I would feel a swell of emotion. I would hear or receive information that was like, for lack of a better word, it was just like knowing. It
Mhm.
was like knowing, like, okay. I mean, it sounds odd, at the time to go, okay, telepathically, I'm receiving something. That just sounded crazy to me at the time. Um, but the more that I learned, the more that I was documenting about what was happening, um, for every law enforcement officer that wouldn't give me the time of day, there were those who did. So, like at the California Department of Justice, for example, even though Ashley was, missing all the way across the country, they wanted to, and they were willing to spend time with me to educate me about a population of people, unidentified deceased John and Jane Does. And these are people in our country. We have, at any given time, I just say right now, we have about 20,000 cases. At that time, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, we had about 40,000 cases. So these are people who have not, their remains, who have not been matched to any known missing people. And the way that that sometimes happens is, let's say you have a case like Ashley. You have someone who's lost. They are on the streets. They're not listed as missing for whatever reason. Okay. In our case, it was law enforcement wouldn't take a report. And let's say that a body turns up in the Las Vegas, in the Las Vegas area. So immediately what investigators will do is they'll look at that and they'll try to determine, do we have any known local missing cases that might match this person? Okay, and then they cast the net a little bit wider. They look at something called the National Crime Information Center database, that's the NCIC. So they look and they go, okay, is there anybody in any other state who has been listed as missing that we could connect the dots maybe to, right? And there's all kinds of variables like, dental records and things like fingerprints and that kind of stuff. But what I was learning then was it's not like what's that show that was very popular, CSI,
I
Crime
was
Scene
going to say
Investigation.
CSI.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not like that because if you have to have let's say you find investment law enforcement investigators find a body, they find skeletal remains. You have to have tissue to have fingerprints, and you have to have that person has to have been listed as missing. So you have inevitably what I came to coin the term called the missing. So these are people like Ashley who fall in the gap. They're not listed as missing. And if they were to turn up deceased, they would be somebody that's an unidentified person. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It makes it really difficult for coroners and people in that world to try to connect the dots. And so, the more that I learned about that, that really became the crux of, okay, I need to shine the light on this. There are lots of other people who are off the grid. And I began to ask the question of, well, what would happen to, let's say, a woman that's off the grid? She's not listed as missing. What if she has a child? Who knows? So I called that group of that population the kids off the grid. And I began to start to teach. Eventually, I became a trainer in the law enforcement world and a trainer for the national NAMI, which is the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And I would teach people about these populations and the things that they could do if they had a loved one who had a mental illness or addiction, and all the ways to try to not take no for an answer. If you had trouble getting a missing persons report filed, and some people just they had become estranged. Maybe they had a brother that was struggling with bipolar or something, and for whatever reason they didn't know where he was, and the outcome they were looking for wasn't necessarily what you would think of as a success story. We had to redefine that word. It became, okay, if I could just know he's still alive, if I could just make sure he's not an unidentified John Doe, if he's still living in the park with a shopping cart, at least I know, right?
Yeah.
I think probably in my mind at the beginning, my intention was, I'm going to find my sister and I'm going to bring her home. That was a very naive intention because the reality was much more complicated. And as I began to assist other family members, it would become obvious that, you really cannot, without what I call your allies in recovery, you really cannot bring someone home that's been on the streets, that's probably been exploited, that has some co-occurring illness and or addiction, and expect them to just take a shower and sit down at the dinner table and everything's okay. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
And that's what I call the revolving door, where you can find someone. It's very difficult. At times it felt impossible, but the odds of someone going back out into the streets, it would perpetuate itself. And so about 4 years in, we got Ashley back the first time. And I'll try to give you the clean version. The clean version is that she had somehow made her way into the state of North Carolina, and she was very broken, and she was had been beaten pretty severely. Had old fractures. She was very, very thin, very emaciated. She was also pregnant, and we got her back for, I would say, maybe 6 months at that time before she went lost again. And that's how it would go for the next 20 years. Sometimes we would know where she was. There were months, years when we didn't. And each time, if we would get a lead, it would be a little bit more disparaging than the time before, and I found myself, after the took 4 years the first time to even get law enforcement to try to do anything, to get her into any system. So it took 4 years, and very persistent effort by my best friend, who should have been an attorney, in another life. She just wouldn't take no, for an answer. And in that situation, I was learning to advocate for myself. I was learning to advocate for my family and for other people. And you think, gosh, I don't have any experience for this. But one of the insights that I had today is you do. You are uniquely equipped to do the things that you think you can't do. And it was all unfolding for me in that way of, sort of learning in hindsight, that these were the truths that were becoming apparent. But I have to say that something that was really another pivotal time, during all this, that, again, I get those little breadcrumbs. I thought, okay, I know that this is bigger than me.
Yeah.
I know, I'm watching, and I still do today, still watch a lot of crime shows and, documentaries and things.
Yeah.
I'm learning about serial killers and people that prey specifically on women who are not reported missing, or women that have drug problems or mental health problems. And I'm just really learning this. Certainly some of the unidentified homicides, I went into a morgue wondering if this one case could be my sister. I'll spare you the details of the case, but it was such an egregious and brutal homicide that I'm like, okay, this is beyond being on the local news. This is, why are we shining the light on this? Um, and I thought, this needs to be in a bigger thing. And I thought, well, I kept seeing in my mind People magazine. I'm like, okay, so they're either telling me that or that's my ego. At the time I didn't really know how to tell the difference. And I thought, well, how am I going to do that? How am I going to get People magazine? And so I just started writing it out. I typed up like a pretend story,
Mm-hmm.
and I printed it out, and I just kind of like, made some notes on it. And it was sharing the story about Ashley, and it was sharing about, kind of the bigger thing that was being uncovered. And I'm like, okay, maybe if we can get in a national story, Ashley had gone, missing again. If we can just get in the national story, maybe we can get funding for the organization. Maybe, we can change a law, something. And a year almost to the day, I got a phone call from a friend who was involved in something called the Doe Network, which was a place I had also volunteered my time to try to help solve cold cases. And he said, do you want to be in People magazine?
Wow, the power of manifestation.
And what I was learning was, yeah, manifesting's a thing, like,
Yeah,
okay, this is
I
a
know.
thing. Law of attraction, this is a thing. What I was learning for myself was it's really, intention is so important, but
Hmm.
intention plus divine intervention,
Yeah.
that equals miracles. and again, miracles, I kind of put like miracles and success stories are in a different category. They maybe don't mean the same thing to me that they might mean to you or someone else. A miracle to me was, you would think, I want to get my sister back and I want her to be well. But then I realized that the story was happening through me, wasn't about me. And it wasn't, yes, I wanted Ashley back and that was important. There was something else that was happening. And it was I was like, okay, this is okay. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
and to try to explain it to someone at that time, if I said things like, I'm being guided, people just looked at me like I had three horns, coming out of my head. And when I would be training law enforcement and training people in the mental health field, I did not say those things. I did not talk to people about, angels and that kind of stuff. But it was, how should I say, the evidence for myself. I was gaining a lot of evidence that I was being helped. And, you know, maybe, I was a change agent for something else that was happening. And so these things continued, and a big change happened in my life. It wasn't all sort of these happy manifesting things. As I said, I was in the morgue. I was helping other families. I was, meeting with a lot of people who were a lot of despairing, information. It was easy to be burned out. I used to sleep with my cell phone under my pillow because, oftentimes I was the
Yeah.
last resort for families who were also searching. They had run into a lot of the same problems that I had. And I had to say then, that's what I needed to do. I think to keep myself sane it was good to be needed, but I didn't understand how quickly. Now I understand a little bit more about being empathic. It was not. I didn't really know how to set those good boundaries at that time, and I was in a former marriage that was falling apart. There was just so much stress that was happening. There was so much. There was a lot of depression and anxiety that I was experiencing, even though I knew that angels were real, and I was thinking, wow, there's really something to God is real, whatever you want to call it, universe, the manager, this
Yeah.
is a real force that holds all of us. But the daily life sometimes was very hard to know things that were happening in the world, and to be a witness to it, and to sometimes feel helpless to change it, you know So I went through a divorce and I moved back to the East Coast. I was 40 when that occurred. And I reconnected with a childhood friend who's now my husband. And I had a baby girl. And I knew then, I'm like, okay, this is a big change for me, because where I once was going out onto the streets and looking for missing people and helping families, I knew that that was not something that I could continue. I was responsible now for a life, a child. And in my heart, I knew that I needed to make that change. I just didn't know how. And I thought, okay. So again, I was listening to spirit, and I said, listen, I have all of this information that I've been gathering for all these years. My sister's still out there. And I had some footage, had some footage from the film that I had been trying to make on my own, interviews with coroners, interviews with other families, that kind of thing. And I said, but I don't have the means. I just went through a divorce, had a child to raise. The nonprofit was a labor of love. What would you have me do? So I wrote it out, and I said, okay, if this story is as important as I think it is, and if that, and I think it's important to you, and as I'm speaking to God, think it's important to you, then I need a way forward. I need a way that's going to, you know, make an impact and help people. Now, in my mind, intention. In my mind, my intention was, okay, I'll find a way to get this documentary done. It'll go to Sundance, it'll win awards, it'll make an impact. I can change laws. Instead, what happened was 2 days later, I got a call and it had been pitched to Lifetime.
Wow.
And my first thought was, um, I'm going to need to get back to you, because my first thought was, well, you know, that's not a documentary.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's
A
a
Lifetime
television.
movie.
It's a Lifetime movie. It's a television movie. And I just kept hearing, ask more questions and find out a little bit more about it. And as it turned out, I said, I would agree to do it if I could be story consultant, and if I could put information about Outpost for Hope at the end, you
Yeah.
know, sort of like, some type of a public service announcement, and the producer's like, well, the whole movie will be that, I'm like, well,
Yeah.
this is, and as it turns out, it was really the essence of the movie they got right. There was plenty of things that they did, it was a Lifetime movie. And it was a very clean movie compared to the harrowing,
Yeah.
difficult experience it really was. Over all these years, they just took the first 4 years of the journey and made it into 89 minutes. But they did a good job, and that movie aired in 2011, and it stayed out in the circulation for 10 years, and it went in over 20 countries around the world. I did not do that on my own. That
No,
was
yeah.
right. And the impact of that, I don't know what the impact is, but I know that I received so many messages from people who would say the common themes were, I never, I never really can look at a homeless person the same way again.
Mhm.
You know, or my sister is lost, or, you know, wow, okay, and I think, well, I know now that was something better that was co-created than anything I could have done on my own. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And it really allowed me to continue training law enforcement. I guess there was some validity, that was given, and okay, some of the things that they shared in the movie were about the nonprofit work and about me being a speaker and a teacher and those kinds of things. So that was very, very positive. And I don't want to give away the ending, but they really did a good job with it, because the ending was not where things were wrapped up in a bow.
Right.
There was more loss and more wondering, and where's Ashley now? And I think that probably one of the more important things that happened as a result of that was it did help me get to a certain point where I said, okay, now the information's out there. I have to turn my attention to really being a mom. That's what I was planning on doing at that time, and turn my attention on being a mom. And, this film is out there, and if people who can change laws are meant to see it, they will. And maybe I can step back a little bit from my advocacy work. And I still would get signs from spirit. I would still hear spirit. And I thought, oh, what am I supposed to do with this? And I would also be teaching people, quietly at my home. I would start to teach a little bit more about manifesting with the divine, and
Mhm.
teaching people how to connect with their angels, and, helping people through their own struggles, as well as their own desires, in trying to achieve better outcomes for themselves. And I had this stirring in my heart, that someday I would do that. And I had been shown that many, many years before, but then I really started to believe it. This is something that I would love to be able to do. And when my daughter was a toddler, she began speaking to me about spirit, what she
Wow.
was seeing, what she was experiencing. And of course, all children come in that way. We all come
Yeah.
in that way. I didn't know that then, but we all come in that way, and that became a journey in and of itself. And I didn't know then. Let's see, Izzy was born in 2000. Let's see, she just had her 15th birthday. So I was 40. I was come to motherhood late, and I was like, okay, someday, I wasn't ready then, but someday I'll come out of the spiritual closet, and someday I'll tell people this, and that's how it will go. But I didn't realize then, how much I really needed that life, to look after, because there would still be more years to come when
Yeah.
Ashley would be missing. And sometimes, like I said, we would get her back, and she was gone more than we got her back. And I had come to a place where I knew that I was probably going to have to live without the closure that I had always wanted. And I thought, okay, I just have to live with that. And what's really interesting about, we were talking earlier about like signs and coincidences and things like that, is when I saw your post about this podcast and the kinds of stories that you were looking for, I heard spirit.
Yeah.
This is something that you should do, and you should, and I said, okay, I'll reach out, and I'll do that. And we were talking about dates that might work, to have the conversation. And I think I had shared a few dates, and you came back and said, oh, December 7th. So what you may or may not know is that what's very significant about that date is 2 years ago today, my family received a call from a coroner in a little town in Alabama. And 2 days later, I was on a plane identifying my sister's body. Yeah.
I want to say real quick that, first of all, I'm so sorry, but I've been feeling her with me this whole
Yeah.
time and I didn't know the end. I didn't know the end of the
Yeah.
story, but
Yeah.
I've been like, somebody is like, I don't, for those of you who don't know me from my other podcast, Magic is Real, which is my near-death experience channel, I'm a psychic medium. And so I sense and feel spirit. I give mediumship readings. And I have been feeling a soul here so strongly that I'm actually like chills up and down my body, my
Yeah.
scalp's tingling. And I
Yeah.
didn't know the end of your story.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I just want to, I mean, she's here.
Oh, I know she is. She told me
She, yeah,
earlier she was going to be here.
yeah,
And my daughter, who's 15, she's a psychic medium herself.
yeah.
And today I was sitting down in prayer with my notes, and I was asking, I asked my grandfather, to come forward, and I asked my
Your grandfather,
sister.
I was going to say earlier when you were talking about him, he's here. But
Yeah.
I was like, I don't want to get too weird too soon. But
No, no,
not
no,
with
no, no.
you, not with you, but yeah,
It's
like
not weird at all. It's not
I
weird at
know.
all because um, in my work now, you know, when I'm speaking with people, and I'm helping them, create different results that they want in their life, I'm listening to spirit, I'm listening to angels, and mostly their spirit guides. I very occasionally, a loved one will come through, and so that's really interesting when that happens. And I have learned for myself. I guess I was on the the remedial program. It's taken me all of these years to finally accept, and to be able to say out loud, I hear spirit.
Yeah.
And we all do. We just don't all recognize how we're being guided. And I'm no one extraordinary. Just something extraordinary happened to me.
Yeah.
And I know now, it's not just a belief. I know that the struggles that we go through, I mean, it's really hard to be on planet Earth sometimes.
Oh yeah.
And it's really challenging, especially, I would say, for myself. I can't speak for anyone else. I would say for myself, when I had no foundation of belief, right, that something was bigger than me. My idea of church was not great. And the only faith that I was receiving in my life was my granddad, right?
Mm,
everything else in my life, in the past there was a lot of abuse and a lot of dysfunction that my sister and I experienced growing up. And, she was lost long before it became her physical reality. And I guess you could say I was uniquely prepared because I was always trying to protect her as a child. And I never felt that I did a good job of that. But it did prepare me later to be a voice for other people who were silent and not seen. And having been a skeptic myself and starting to understand, oh, there's a rhythm to this. There's a
yeah.
language that I'm being shown and given. And maybe it's different for everyone. Maybe my formula doesn't necessarily work for everyone, in terms of what I hear and what I see. But I feel like my sense too is in having worked now with enough people that um, there is sort of a basic protocol, for learning to understand those signs for yourself. And I think probably there's not many things that would be more empowering for someone when they're really hurting.
Yeah.
I can speak for myself. All I really wanted was for somebody to tell me, oh, this is what you do, and it's all going to be okay. It's
Mhm.
going to hurt like hell for the next 20 years. You're going to lose everything, almost your sanity in doing this. And a lot of people are going to fall away from your life, you know. Um, but I'm still standing, no pun intended.
I
I'm
love
still
it.
I'm
And
still
also
standing.
all the people that you've brought into your world that you've helped. And I'm just getting chills because I know that that's her big message
It
is that
is.
when I mean, she's a strong one. I feel too that, um, one of her biggest, ooh, she's just like, she's actually a very joyful spirit, despite the fact that in this world it was her mental illness and also trauma, but it was being bipolar is
Hmm.
what I'm feeling, is that
Hmm. You're right.
it wasn't that her soul was a beautiful person, like a beautiful soul rather.
Yeah.
And she was suffered from mental illness. But what she really wants to impart is that when you said, I didn't feel I protected her as much as I could have, she's like, you were doing the best you could with the tools that you had as a child. And
Yeah.
in the end, you were her biggest advocate. And and her sort of mission here was you two made this soul contract that this was going to
Yeah.
be your mission to help so many other people through because of your love for Ashley. It's I just have chill after chill. It's just crazy. And I keep seeing
Now
this
you're
like
gonna make me cry. Yeah.
I mean she's making me cry, but there's
I
just
know.
like I keep seeing this sort of pastel colored heart. I don't know if that's something I
Hmm.
saw in your I don't know if that
Hmm.
was in your signature, but I just keep seeing this symbol of a heart with these different pastel colors where to me it feels like she's saying, no, no, no. y- Everything happened the way it was meant to for me to inspire you. Who you said I'm just a regular person. But you're like Erin Brockovich, where it's like because you didn't necessarily you weren't a lawyer, you didn't have
Right.
knowledge of this, but because
Right.
you loved her so much and you do
Right.
love her so much,
Right.
it prompted you to fight for other people. And
Right.
I also want to add that this is such a widespread problem. And the homelessness problem. I'm from LA.
Yes.
It's so
Skid Row.
difficult because you can't arrest somebody for being mentally ill, but you also can't commit them without their
That's
permission.
right.
And
HIPAA laws and
they
yeah.
can leave. And so the thing is
Right.
that they're not in their right mind, so they can't make those decisions. But
Right.
then there's this, but then we're impeding on their freedom. And I've even thought, well, can't we just build this like housing? But if we built housing, then we would need people to monitor them and make sure
That's
they're on
right.
their medication. And it
That's
would
right.
have to be,
Right.
hey, if you agree to treatment and medication,
Right.
then we can give you housing. But the thing is
Right.
that they're mentally ill, so they can't make those judgments
Right.
for themselves.
Right.
And
Right.
so it's just this catch 22 where there's really there's no way at this point to really help the people as much as they need. But it also is important to me because I just lost one of my best friends to bipolar disorder
Okay.
who was like the best guy in the world, the most creative, talented, amazing person, but
Hmm.
he refused to get help for his
Right.
illness. He didn't even tell anyone. And he ended up going into psychosis and hallucinating and running into the woods in the
Yes.
nighttime in the winter and getting tangled up in a tree and drowning in 3 inches of water. And it's, I get so many
Yeah.
chills because I feel like
Yeah.
he's been here this whole time too.
Yes. Yes.
And the thing is that he'd been arrested, not, I mean, arrested, but it was like he'd been in psychosis. And the cops had come, police had come and had to take him away. And his whole thing was, I will never let that happen to me again. His mother gave me this information later. Mom, I'm never going to get taken away. So when he
Right.
went into psychosis and our friend said, listen, if you don't go to the hospital, I have to call the police, he just took
Right.
off running. So
Right.
he ended up passing away as a result of his illness.
Mhm.
And he was missing. And I got that call. So when you said, do you know when someone's missing? I said, I know when someone's missing.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I only had to know for 2 days. There were search parties out and dogs and on my friend's farm, but it is devastating
It is
because
devastating. It's devastating.
these people are beautiful people who
Yeah.
I can't even say they need us. I mean, it's tough because, yes, they all need help.
Right.
How do we do that? How do we make sure that they're all in proper care?
Well,
Yeah.
first I want to say that I absolutely understand your pain, and I'm very sorry for that loss. It is at times, when I bump up against it, I say, wow, it's so senseless, right?
Yeah.
But in order for it to change, and I think, obviously, we're here in Earth School. We're
Yeah.
trying to lift the vibration of the planet, which at times can feel like gravel in a blender, right?
Mm,
And the first thing that I think has to change really is perception of, honoring and acknowledging someone who is not in their right mind. And one of the things that when I was training law enforcement, I would share what's called brain spect imaging, which are certain kind of images of the brain that will show, what's working or what parts of the brain are not working. And one thing that I found really interesting was that, someone that has Parkinson's, for example, the brain inside of the brain in the SPECT imaging looks a lot like someone that's on meth. Okay, for example. Now, you're not going to know that, okay, if you're seeing only the outcome of someone's erratic behavior, right? Like the law enforcement officer, police told me early on, hey, if she wants to be crazy and run around naked on the streets, that's her problem.
yep.
If she gets caught using drugs, then it's our problem, right? Much later, I learned to use words like endangered, doesn't
Mm,
have her medication, those kinds of things. Okay, right? So perception is everything, because if we are looking at people through filters and not looking at them as a soul like you or me, if we're looking at someone based on, color, creed, religion, you know, gender, sexual identity, all these things, which, clearly we have work to do on this planet. It's acknowledging that. And yes, in terms of someone having the right to be an adult and be missing, you and I have the right to do that. We could, if we had the means and the will, you and I could go off to the Bahamas, and
mhm.
no one has to inform anyone of our whereabouts unless there's a reason to believe that you or I are in any kind of
Endangered.
danger, right? So that's where things like, and then HIPAA comes into play. There's privacy laws. And so perception has to change. And in my experience, I will also say that the healthcare system, which is not great,
Yeah.
and there are laws, in certain states. You have Laura's Law in California, and you have, the Baker Act here in Florida, which is like a 72-hour psychiatric hold. I can't tell you the number of times that we went to court to try to get, emergency court orders and things like that. And I can remember specifically trying to get something in place so that we could get get Ashley Baker acted. And the judge saying, well, we don't have her location. And I'm like, and that's the problem. And
That's,
so they
yeah.
could never issue it, because there was no location. So if they know the location and we have enough proof or evidence to issue the Baker Act, then law enforcement could go, quote, pick her up and put her in a psychiatric facility for 72 hours. But that's not really going to do anything. So, but like with your friend, saying, I'm not going to be held. I'm not going to the hospital. I'm not going to do those things. I'm just going to go do, in the limited awareness of what his impulses were to do. And there is evidence, in peer review studies of things like, peer, they call it peer-to-peer courts and things like that where, there are some quote success stories. Have a friend who had a sister missing, and she had schizophrenia, and about 12 years they were looking for her. Lots of things that they were trying to do. And then when they finally did locate her, there was some things put into place where she did agree to medication. It's actually a new medication that's out on the market now. There's an injection, and it lasts, I guess, for
Oh,
I don't know
yes.
how long, but several
Yes.
months, something like that. And she was able to get her life back together,
Mhm.
which is a miracle. And I think that sometimes things like mental illness are not well understood or even accepted. If I say the word addiction, and let's say we're at a party and we're talking to people about it, there may be three people in that group that we're speaking to who think of addiction as nothing more than poor impulse control
Mhm.
versus what's really happening in the brain. And I can't tell you the number of people who said to me, well, she just has to hit rock bottom, and uh, my answer would be, well, if you've been raped and exploited and trafficked and taken to different states and, you know, gotten pregnant and all of these things, and every time, there's been many times, unrecognizable, beaten black and blue, those kinds of things, you know, those things weren't enough. That's, you would say, oh, right? Like if somebody said, "Hey, you're diabetic," so that means that when you go grocery shopping, you really shouldn't eat the chocolate cake, right? But you
Mhm.
have awareness. You go, "Oh, okay, I need to change my diet. There's medication I need to take," right? But someone who's dealing with mental illness and or co-occurring addiction, um, it's hard to say what came first, the chicken or the egg. Does it really matter? Because they're not operating with that list of, well, if I do this, then that, right? And so it really becomes a slippery slope. And many people in the criminal justice world and in the mental health world will tell you that jails are the new asylums. There are
Yeah.
there are more people in jails than there are psychiatric beds. So, I mean, I could go on, but
And I was just I know that I was like looking weird, but I just felt like Ashley was tapping on my shoulder again. So I was listening
mhm,
to you, but my eyeballs were
mhm,
directed towards her. I wasn't ignoring you. I just felt like Ashley was like doing like she's sort of tapping me on the shoulder. Um and I was going to say that I did a reading for a friend, but I hadn't talked to her in many, many years. She was a coworker, and her mother had been murdered by her brother, and her brother was schizophrenic. And when her mother came through, all she said to me was, "Please forgive him. He's in
mhm,
prison. He
mhm.
doesn't deserve to be there." The mother was more worried about the son and his
Wow.
well-being because she said, I mean, I'm just getting chills again. My gosh. She just kept saying, "I'm fine.
Yeah.
He's the one that needs love." She said, "I'm with him every day in prison. And
Yeah.
and even though it's hard, please forgive him." And there is a real problem with he's schizophrenic. In his
Yeah.
lucid moments, he is suffering a fate worse than prison, worse than death. He's living with the guilt of that and knowing that I don't even know. I didn't mean to do. I mean, he didn't mean to. He
Right.
and his mother were very close. They loved each other,
Right.
and she took great care of him. So
Right.
there is this problem of what do we do with our mentally ill, and there's also an issue of you see him. Now they're calling them, the unhoused a person,
hmm
and you
hmm
and sometimes it can be difficult because they're acting scary, and to
Right.
be like the reason they're here is one of, I can say basically two reasons. Is one, they're mentally ill and their
hmm
parents and their families tried to help them,
Right.
but they couldn't rein them in. And
Right.
there's no law that says I can hold this person against their will. The
That's right.
second reason is trauma. And
That's right.
I'm willing to bet almost every
Yes.
single one of them,
Yes.
especially women,
Yes.
were sexually abused and or
Yes.
emotionally, physically abused. They
Yes.
haven't received the trauma care that they need, so they have turned to
Yes.
drugs, and
Yes.
and they don't have a support system. So it's easy to look at them and judge them and say they're crazy or they're dirty or
Right.
whatever. But
Right.
you
Right.
have to
And
remember, yeah.
well, and I would say, that I've had ex- read lots and lots and lots and lots of research to absolutely back up everything that you're saying. And for anyone that wanted to learn more about those issues, I would recommend there's two books I would recommend. One is The Body Keeps the Score,
Mm-hmm.
and the other is What Happened to You. And
Yeah.
the author's name escapes me at the moment, but he's a neuropsychiatrist, and it's basically the trauma that changes the brain, right?
Yeah.
Especially there's something called the ACEs study, where children that have experienced very significant trauma before they're the age of 4 or 5, that's when the brain is developing. And once you get past that, and without any significant help or intervention or anything like that, it's anyone's guess as to what's going to happen. And so, I always did know, because I was experiencing it myself. Ashley was traumatized,
Yeah.
and by the same person, and I wasn't believed, actually, until my sister passed. There were
Yeah.
some people that were very close to me that didn't believe it, and it took other people sort of coming forward. And I think that we miss a lot of opportunities when we don't acknowledge someone's pain. I certainly know that in our um, world, as light workers, sometimes people are very careful about using the language of saying someone's a victim, or they
Mm-hmm.
signed up for this, or it was
Yeah.
whatever. And all of those things are fine. I don't have any qualms about anything like that. But I think it's more, yes, and
Yes.
while
And
you're living on this planet,
it
if
does matter.
you're going to play full out, you may be a spirit having a human experience, but if your human experience has been this, then we have to acknowledge that,
It's
so
very
that
valid.
the soul and the physical, and the mind can um, do what they came here to do. And I know that Ashley, I do feel now, and I feel like I can say this maybe without crying, is I know now she's safe. She shows me that. I see
Yep.
her in meditation. I've had other um, angels and Jesus come forward and tell me, and and things had to be a certain way. Doesn't mean that, okay, that we were destined to. People have
Right.
asked me this, clients have asked me, was I supposed to be abused? Was it? I'm like, listen, I think there are a lot of ways that we can meet our soul plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the more damaging experiences that people can have that erodes their faith is to experience so much harm and so much pain and abandonment that they truly, truly and deeply forget that, they are connected to the
Oh,
divine,
yes.
right? And so, um, in the sense of the word of separation, I definitely had that experience myself. We're thinking, well, gosh, if God was real, why did He allow this, and why were we abused? And those were the questions I was asking, in my early 20s. Now I'm 55 now, so I'm asking different questions now, and have the luxury of having hindsight. But still, if we're going to, I think, ascend, in any sort of fashion, maybe not gracefully, we do have to acknowledge, that people do struggle. For me, what I have learned is that oftentimes in our struggle, we are being called to service. I,
Absolutely.
I wouldn't have consciously signed up for it, as a human being, like, oh, you're going to do this and you're going to do that, and
Yeah.
then you're going to sign it. That's not how it worked. It was very organic, the way that it sort of played out in front of me when I came to that understanding. And the last thing you want to hear when you are struggling with the loss of someone you love, a senseless way, or you're dealing with a cancer diagnosis or something that just seems insurmountable, financial
Yeah.
disaster, the last thing you want to hear is, oh, well, that's your plan, or that's your
You
karma.
chose this. I
Right. You
never say
chose
that to
this. I'm like,
people.
eh. It's okay. And, are you willing to believe that God, or whatever you want to call it, God, the manager, the source, is bigger than fill in the blank, lack, disease, illness? And for me, the answer at that time was no. I didn't have any concept of it. But as I began to get the breadcrumbs, that was evidence. I was sort of lodging it, and keeping an inventory of it. And then I gained more confidence about, okay, again, the outcome I wanted was my sister safe. I did finally get that because now I know for sure that she's safe. It didn't come in the way that I wanted, but I have learned it's not always easy, still, even for me, to say this or something better. You know,
Hmm.
these Hayes words, we don't always know what the big picture is, but we do have someone, and we have our own team of support in terms of angels and loved ones and spirit guides who are there to help guide us, but it's going to, they might have to change our paradigm a little bit to do
So
that.
well said, Libba. Thank you so much. I mean,
You're welcome.
you and I
You're
will
welcome.
speak a lot more off
I think
camera,
so
but
too.
I know for the
Yeah.
sake of keeping this succinct, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story,
Thank
for
you.
doing the work, the advocacy work that you have, for being a beautiful human being,
Thank you.
and for reaching out because this is exactly the type of story that I want people to hear, and I want people to know that there's so many versions of overcoming. And when I put out my little advertisement that was looking for guests, I said, look, I'm not looking for perfection. I'm not looking for people that have been through adversity and
No,
going, I
right.
am now, my life is perfect. It's like,
Right.
what I'm looking for is, how did you survive?
Yeah.
What did you learn?
Yeah.
Where, what good things came out of a really bad
Oh, yeah.
situation?
Yes.
And I'm sorry for your loss. And I'm also 110% sure that your sister is smiling from the other side and knowing that
Too.
she did her work. She may not have
Absolutely.
felt like it while she was here, but she's
Yeah.
like,
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
inspired change, and I know that
Yes.
that work will continue. So
I
thank you,
agree.
Libba Phillips,
Oh,
for
thank you.
here. Hello, I'm back. And we're back just for a little addendum to this episode. We just wanted to share that after I stopped recording, I mentioned that Libba's sister Ashley was here with me, and I asked her, I said, I'm seeing this, is there a reason why I would see this little, I thought it was a parrot, but I saw it as a gray bird, like this little gray bird. And what did you tell me, Libba?
I had a little gray bird, a cockatiel named Peekaboo.
Named Peekaboo. Now, Ashley told me that she has the bird with her, and Libba laughed. I said, she's telling me that she has this bird with her, and was it yours or was it your childhood
It,
bird?
it was it was actually my bird
Your
that I
bird.
had adopted, and he passed a couple of years ago.
And
Yeah.
she confirmed that he did pass, and Ashley was telling me that she had him with her. And then I asked too if I said she's showing me a necklace with ashes in it, that you have some of her ashes in. And what did you tell me, Libba?
Right here in my office, not a foot from where I'm sitting. I have a necklace that is a little cardinal that has some of her ashes in it. And right before the call, as I was walking into my office, I looked over at it, and I'm like, and it was so interesting because it was in my mind. I knew she was going to show up. She told me she was going to show up, and I thought it's extremely validating and reassuring for me too that she came through to you. I knew that she was going to, but I think it's
Magical.
so awesome when it
It's
happens.
so awesome. And I just wanted to share that with the audience because I know this is not my spiritual channel, but just to bring some evidence, not because
Yes,
I'm trying to convert anybody. It's totally okay if you're
yes,
an atheist or you don't believe in this stuff. But I just wanted to hopefully give somebody some hope and inspiration that I'm telling you right now. I connect with both of us, communicate with people on the other side. I was also a skeptic, let me just add. For many years, I was an agnostic, an atheist, and I now believe that this is real because it happens to me every day. And so
right.
I just wanted to share even more inspiration that I hope will bring some comfort and peace to those people who, to everyone, but also to people who may be like, I'm not really sure what I think of that, but just keep it in mind. So
Yeah, or
thanks again.
isn't that interesting?
Isn't that
Right,
interesting? Yeah,
right,
just thought
right.
provoking. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to push an agenda, just
Yeah,
leaving it there. So thanks, Liva, for sharing that.
of course.